Okay, welcome everybody to A League of Their Own, Investing in Pro Sports. My name is Tom Ferry, and I am the Executive Director and the founder of the Sports and Society program here at the Aspen Institute. Our signature initiative is Project Play, which is all about how to build healthy children and communities through sports. We work with most of the professional leagues, as well as ESPN, Nike, Under Armour, U.S. Olympic Committee, PGA of America, thinking about how to get and keep more kids playing sports in this country. We also have a series called The Future of Sports, where we look into the crystal ball and take these conversations that are on the edge and really help people think about where they're headed, whether it be college sports, pro sports, Olympic sports, or otherwise. So I'm super thrilled to introduce this session here, or welcome this session. And we got a nice group of folks to be part of this conversation. We have Alex Rodriguez, of course, the great baseball player, and David Rubenstein, the legendary philanthropist and private equity pioneer. And also, this will be moderated by Gregg Lemkau, who is formerly a Goldman Sachs, an advisor to many professional teams, Endeavor, and otherwise helping them think about how to invest in this space. So let's get the show started.
See ya! He joins the 3,000 hit club.
Diving stop by Rodriguez.
A record-breaking grand slam.
I came from very modest beginnings. My mother had 2 jobs. My father left my 2 siblings and I at the age of 10. And we had to move every 18 months because they kept raising the rents. And I just remember thinking, like, if I do my job right, Mom, you'll never work again. That gave me kind of the hunger to do well. Since I was 10 years old, I had 2 dreams: Major League Baseball player, and 2 was to be a CEO of some public company.
Hey, Greg, before I start, I got to tell you a quick story. My man, Lenny, right here. Lenny, raise your hand. They call him Boogie. Boogie, give him a hand, give him a hand. So Boogie says to me, and David, this is a real story because you introduced me to this great gentleman here. He says, right out there about 6 minutes ago, he says, Alex, did you play with the Yankees? I said, yeah, Boogie, about 15 years. He goes, I think I remember you. Was Mickey Mantle your teammate? Boogie, I gotta go. No, he was not my teammate.
Wow, okay, we're getting started. So good evening, everyone. My name is Gregg Lemkau. I'm CEO of a firm called BDT and MSD, and we provide advice and capital to some of the world's leading family-owned businesses and founders. But most importantly, it's my great pleasure to be here tonight to moderate this panel. You know, we've all seen the value of professional sports increase exponentially in recent years, and it's been driven by a couple of factors. We've seen just the scarcity of live events in a world of entertainment that's been kind of streaming on demand all the time. And we've also seen an influx of capital. So it went from a game that was bought by a small group of high net worth people to institutional pools of capital. And so the combination of these factors has really driven the emergence of sports as an investable asset class. And I could think of no one better to discuss this than one of the world's greatest athletes in Alex Rodriguez and one of the world's greatest investors in David Rubenstein. 2 amazing individuals who have one thing in common, at least one thing in common, each professional sports team owners. You know, Alex, with his business partner Mark Lowry, purchased a minority interest in the NBA's Minnesota Timberwolves and the WNBA's Lynx in 2021. A minority interest with a path to control, but more on that later. David, of course, is a founder of the Carlyle Group and just a remarkable philanthropist, and he became the majority owner of the Major League Baseball's Baltimore Orioles earlier this year. So David, Alex, thank you both for being here with us this evening. Thank you. Alex, since you have your own walk-up music, you get to go first.
Great.
Yes, from the video, it's kind of clear you've had a keen interest in business from an early age and early in your career. But at what point did your interest in business transition to ambition for sports ownership?
You know, all along, ever since I was kind of 10, 12 years old, sitting at home with my father in New York City, watching the Mets, the Yankees, I always had 2 dreams, and that's to play a baseball and to be in business. And that was kind of the plan from day one. I made my early investment in real estate when I was about 22 years old because my mom kept moving around apartments, and I kept asking, Mom, why do we keep moving every 18 months? She said, well, the landlord keeps raising the rents. And I remember going down on my knees one day and I prayed and I said, Dear Lord, if I ever can trade places with a landlord, I will do that. And sure enough, about a decade later, I bought a little duplex by Miami Arena where the Miami Heat play. and then sold that for 250,000, sold that for double. Long story short, over the last 20 years, we've acquired around $5 billion of multifamily assets all over the Southeast United States. And that started opening up my idea about maybe one day I can live out a dream to play baseball and then to own a sports team.
So you first took a run at the Mets,
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't prevail, and then you pivoted to basketball with the Timberwolves. And what was it? Why basketball, not baseball? Is it the sport? Is it the league? Was it just the particular deal?
I think the process of the New York Mets was very, very educational for me. I mean, it was like getting an MBA in sports ownership. It took about a year-long process. We had Wachtell, we had EY, we had a bunch of great people, great investors, and thank goodness for my friend Steve Cohen, who won that deal for us. Because, when I looked at our thesis for baseball, and David has one of the 6 teams that I think you can't own, but the other 24 were probably short. And we saw some tremendous headwinds in baseball, and this is since the recent changes. And we thought the Mets, Baltimore, Cubs, Yankees are all Dodgers, San Francisco, and probably a couple others. So when we looked at it, that door shut, we were very depressed, and then all of a sudden, all the bankers started calling and saying, wait a minute, you offer $2.3 billion for the Mets, you have money, maybe there's another team to buy. And the first deal that came to us with a controlling path was the Timberwolves. And then we looked at both assets, and the Timberwolves worth $1 billion less. And when we bought them, that was George Floyd, that was COVID. We showed up one day at the stadium, I'll never forget this. George Floyd happened, we closed. 2 days later, we're driving to the park, Mark and I, my partner, and they canceled the game against New Jersey Nets. And we get to the arena, and there's not a soul here. And I'm like, what did we do? We paid $1.5 billion for this team. It's losing $75 million, David. And how are we going to get? And now we're on the path to be making over $50 million of EBITDA. And it's been 3 years of hard work, but it's been a fun process so far.
So David, you're an incredibly accomplished investor. You're also a world-renowned philanthropist. So what was the driver behind your purchase of your hometown Orioles? Was it an investment or was it civic duty?
Well, I'm not a great athlete like Alex was. I played Little League Baseball, and I was an all-star, but I was at 9 years old, and it was a Jewish Little League. So, and I didn't realize that every Jewish Little League all-star doesn't turn out to be Sandy Koufax. So when I realized that around the age of 11, and I decided I would do other things with my life, and I just wasn't a great athlete. But I did grow up in Baltimore, and Baltimore has an affection for the Orioles that's hard to describe to people that aren't from Baltimore. Baltimore is a blue-collar town. When I was growing up, it was the 9th biggest city in the United States. Now it's not even the top 20. It's had a gigantic white flight. It's a 62% black city now. It has very high STD rates, illiteracy rates, crime rates, and so the city has really had its problems. And the owner of the team had owned it for 30 years, and he had come down with, in effect, Alzheimer's and dementia, and so his son was running it. And because he hadn't put a lot of money into it, the team wasn't doing all that well up until the year before I bought it. The owner was not that popular. So many people in Baltimore said to me, you have some money, why don't you come back to Baltimore and do something for Baltimore? I tried to do things for our country in Washington and various what I call patriotic philanthropy things, but I realized that Baltimore had given me a public school education. My parents were raised there, they were married there, they're buried there. I'll no doubt be buried in Baltimore as well. And I thought I should probably do more for Baltimore than I've done. So when the owner of the team approached me last summer and said, why don't you buy a minority stake in the team? I've heard about you and so forth. And I thought about it and I said, well, I didn't really want to be a minority stake owner because I didn't think I would really have the ability to really effectuate any kind of increase in value that way. And I ultimately said, give me a path to control. And he came back and said, you can have control now at the certain price we negotiated. So I would say I don't expect to make the greatest investment of all time, but I don't expect to lose money. I see it as half philanthropic and half investment. And I did bring in people from Baltimore who wanted to participate in the revival of the team because the team is so important to the strength of the city. And if the team does well, I think the city will be rebirthed a bit. So it was really somewhat designed to help Baltimore, and obviously didn't want to lose money on it. It's hard to lose money on sports teams, to be honest. Over the last 10 years, the value of NFL teams has gone up by roughly 400%. The value of NBA teams has gone up roughly 500%. and the value of baseball teams over the last 10 years has gone up at roughly 200%. So there's always somebody else out there who will buy a team from you, probably at a higher price. It's hard to lose money on a sports team, but you have to do a reasonably good job. And right now, when I go to the games, people are happy as I throw out balls, I throw out hats, I'm running around, and I'm inviting people to the owner's box. But if the team loses, then I won't be so popular. I can give away hats to everybody, season tickets to everybody. I'm going to be booed. I know that. So I'm trying to take advantage of the good situation because we're doing well now. Eventually, in the way baseball operates, it's, as Alex knows, it's not as good an economic environment because in the NFL, you basically split revenues, 50% to the players, 50% to the owners. In the NBA, 50% to the owners, 50% to the players. Baseball does not have that. And therefore, there's no limit to what you can pay a baseball player. So one player got a $700 million contract. Well, that's great for the player, but if you're the owner and you're the investor, you have to wonder whether you're going to get your money back on that. So it's a more complicated investment environment than baseball, and that's why the values of the baseball teams haven't gone up as much as NBA and NFL teams.
So we learned that David's an investor and a baseball player, which I didn't know.
Yeah.
Alex, you're obviously a baseball player and an investor. Can you tell us
I'm not a lawyer from Duke either.
Tell us a little bit about A-Rod Corp. What else are you doing there beyond real estate and in the sports teams?
Yeah, Greg, I always had a little bit of an imposter syndrome. Being an athlete, you're considered kind of synonymous with dumb or not a good businessman. And, I don't know if you guys remember, there was an ESPN piece that came out maybe 20 years ago called Broke. And it was talking about all these players going from rags to riches. So I started doing it very quietly. And like I said, I started with a duplex. So we do three things at A-Rod Corp. We do sports, real estate, and we invest like the very, very freshman team of Carlisle on private equity groups, like a private equity group, which we've invested in over 50 companies over the last 15 years. And usually minority stakes. Usually we'll take a board seat, and these are smaller companies and nothing really fancy. But we've done relatively well in that bracket. So those are the three things that we focus on.
And then, Alex, how does being a world-class athlete help you as an owner? You and I have talked about being one of the very few brown or black owners in a league that's predominantly brown or black players. How does that help you relate to the players, and do you think it gives you an edge as an owner?
Greg, I think being a player today is one of the hardest jobs in America. And I say that sincerely. Obviously, the gifts and the curse, right? The gifts are the incredible amount of money. I'm conflicted with David, what he said, because I used to say, what's wrong with a player making $700 million? And now I'm saying, well, wait, we need to cut that down a little bit. So I'm a little conflicted sometimes. I think, Greg, I would never want to play in today's day and age because it's so hard. I got myself in enough trouble without social media. Imagine today, oh my God. I think I kept the New York Post alive for all those years. This is a true story. I had more Backpage, not all for good, obviously, than anyone around until I think Tiger Woods came with his issue, and I was very thankful for that. But Tiger's a great friend also. But, everything's ups and downs, David.
Well, look.
But I think one thing I want to say is empathy for the players. I've met with all our players year in and year out. I'm so impressed with how smart they are, how well they dressed, how goal-oriented they are, how much they care about life after. They want to be good investors. You deal with these guys. You're going to deal with these guys too. So that's the part that I get the most enjoyment out of.
Look, it's a strange thing. I'm now 74 years old, not old enough to be President of the United States, but getting there. And in a few years, I'll be qualified. The players on the Orioles are very young. They're 21, 22, 23. And, I was 50 years old before they were born. So I don't have that much in common with them. I go in and cheer them up and say, hey, they did a great job. But what am I supposed to say? I don't really, don't socialize with them. It's complicated to do that for an owner. But the other day I was doing an event in Chicago with Jerry Reinsdorf for Mike Milken on prostate cancer. And I was there early, and some of the Orioles were sitting around. And I said, I'm going to do a prostate cancer event. And the players are so young, they said, what's a prostate? I said, let me explain to you how this works. And I described the value of a prostate, but I don't think they really knew what it was. So these guys are young. And, the problem with being a professional athlete is it's great when you're a professional athlete, assuming you're doing reasonably well. But there are very few Alex Rodriguez's. Most players have average careers, and after 3, 4, 5 years, they're gone. So let's suppose you think about yourself. At the age of 26, 7, 8, your career is over as a professional athlete. The NFL, the average player lasts about 4.5 years, if that. If your career is over, what you've trained for 20 years is over by the time you're 30, let's say. What do you do with the rest of your life? And I've often thought it's interesting to look at which athletes have done great things after they left and which athletes basically didn't do very much. So Alex has obviously built a very good financial empire and going to have a terrific team. There's some other people that have done great things. Roger Staubach built a great real estate empire. But many of the great athletes that I've known or read about, they basically were living on their pension in the end because they just didn't really know how to invest. They didn't know how to take advantage of their brand name. And ultimately, they just had put so much into their body becoming a great athlete, they didn't exercise their brain enough to really understand business. And it's a sad situation. I wish we could educate players more about financial situations, but there's some league rules about doing this as if we're doing something that might be harmful. So it's very complicated to educate players about finances.
Yeah, so you mentioned you're 74, you look like you're 64, and Gregg, you're going to be in business, and you're one of the best business bankers now, principals on the planet, and that's why Michael Dell gave you that great position as his partner. But you're literally in the probably second or third inning of your business career if you're looking at Warren Buffett. If you look at Warren Buffett, he made 99% of his net worth after his 50th birthday. So this idea about the long game, now if you think about that and you contrast it to baseball, I looked at 2 data points that jumped off the page for me. And this is why I started my company at A-Rod Corp, strictly out of fear. Is one, the average career is 5.5 years, okay? 5.5 years. And less than 5% of the Major League Baseball players today have a 4-year college degree. So you just take those 2 data points and you will short that stock. There's a reason why these kids get in trouble.
Take the NBA. Today, there are very few players that have a college degree in the NBA because of the one-and-done rule. They go to college for maybe a year. They don't really go to class. As soon as the NCAA finals are over, they're done classes. Even at Duke, where I was a chair for a number of years, we won a championship one year because I was giving signals to Coach K, and he was using them to win. Even at Duke, if a player leaves after 1 year, they're not going back and get a college degree. It used to be after 3 years, they might go in the pros, and they would go back. And I think Michael Jordan went back after 3 years and got a college degree. But very rarely will you go back after you've left after 1 year. Now, some of these guys will turn out to be great, but some of them are going to maybe peter out. So there was the best player Duke had in recent years was Zion Williamson. Some of you may remember him. And he made me into a Zionist. I had not been a Zionist before, but I was such a big believer in him. But he's had real problems as a pro, and he could wind up, if he doesn't lose some weight or get in better shape, he can wind up being out of the pros and, before he's 30 years old. So these are situations you can't really predict what's going to happen to a player, but you have to recognize that these guys have put so much of their life into it, and then it's going to all be over at some point in the high 20s, early 30s. Very rarely do you get a Willie Mays who plays to 40, and that's very rare. And then even when you play to 40, what did Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle do the rest of their life? They're very great baseball players, but they mostly signed autographs. They were basically using their name. It's not a terrible thing to do, but basically, after one day they're the heroes of the world, and the next day they're kind of signing autographs for the rest of their life. And you would wish that they would have learned something more about how to be more involved in business or more involved in other kind of things that would be more useful to society.
So David, let's talk about bringing business to baseball in kind of an analytical mind. Baseball is a very traditional game. It's a very analytical game. It was kind of rocked by Moneyball about 20 years ago. I know Michael Lewis is here this week. I heard you say recently that Moneyball is like hieroglyphics compared to AI. What do you think AI is going to do to the game in terms of how it's analyzed and how it's managed?
Yeah, when I was paying attention to baseball, and I did pay attention to it when I was in high school, and I memorized all of the averages and everything. Then I went away to college. My mother threw away all my baseball cards, which are now no doubt very valuable, and I didn't pay much attention to it. As I've come back to it, it's a different game. It used to be you paid attention to home runs, RBIs, batting average. Now there are analytics that are so much more important than the things that I used to think about. And the 2 most important ones would be something called OPS, which is in effect your slugging percentage and your on-base percentage, and also games above replacement, how much better you are than somebody else who could have done that job. And these things are very analytical, and so we have it, our team, and they have it most teams, teams of analysts who do nothing but analyze the velocity off every bat, every pitch is analyzed to the nth degree, and it's very, very scientific. And I don't really understand it yet. I'm kind of learning it, but I'm sure it changed while you were in baseball.
Yeah, no, David, that's a great point of view. And look, at the end of the day, we look at analytics as a guide, not a gospel. And so many times in businesses, the pendulum goes way too far to the right. And it certainly did in baseball, where it made it a worse game. I think it's come back now probably to the 70% mark. When it gets to the 60, it'll probably be just right. You've seen some of the veteran coaches coming back, like Bochy, Dusty Baker. These guys have won. But, we were speaking about a mutual friend that helped David many years ago start Carlisle, a gentleman by the name of Ed Mathias. And Ed Mathias is one of a kind. But Ed Mathias, if you put a 24-year-old kid that's going to speak analytics and AI much more fancier than Ed Mathias, but I guarantee you there's room for David as one of his cabinet members and advisors to have a guy like Ed. You get this analytics information, you talk to Ed and some of your senior members, and then you come with the decisions. And that's a much better protocol than just dive on analytics and die by the sword and look at iPads. You still have to look around and watch people, because this is a game played by humans that go through divorces, sickness, all kind of things. And you have to be able to read body language and make real-time decisions along with the data.
I think two points I'd like to talk about for briefly. One is, why is it that people in Baltimore cheer the Orioles? Why do people in Los Angeles cheer the Dodgers? What is it about a local team that makes people feel so happy? They're not owners of the team. They don't really know the players. But there's something about cheering for something that you have some connection to, just as you cheer your college team. So there's something you can't quite explain. Now, people are prepared to say, I will die for my country. Soldiers go overseas and they will die for the country. Nobody says, I will die for my city, but they will cheer for their city to the nth degree, and they will have fights over whether their team is better than another team from another city. Why is it? It's hard to analyze why people are so caught up in it, but I guess it's a matter of pride. People who live in Baltimore want to be proud of the fact that their team beat New York or something like that. And it's something that's very, I haven't quite figured it out yet. Also, secondly, why are teams going up in value so much, more than inflation by a lot? Well, it's really because of television. In the NFL, if nobody showed up at an NFL game, no fan showed up, the NFL teams would still be very profitable because the television contracts are so gigantic. And why are they gigantic? Of the 50 greatest, most watched shows in American history on television, 46 are NFL games. 46 are the most watched shows ever, including presidential assassinations, inaugurations, and things like that. 46 of the top 50 shows ever on television in America are NFL games. So advertisers advertise an enormous amount, and they pay a lot of money, and it goes through the system. That's why people buy these teams, because the values of television viewing is going up so much if you're watching by streaming or other things. And one of the things that Americans came up with recently was to realize we're not the only people doing this. So a lot of Americans went over to Europe and they bought Premier League teams, soccer teams, which when the first one did it, the Glazer family, they bought, I think, a stake in Manchester United. I said, what are they doing? But obviously they're really smart. Now the team is worth $7 billion pounds, I think it is, $7 billion. And
David, I have a question for you.
Small amount.
I have a question for you, and for you, Greg. So you talked about, there's basically 25 to 30 million people that watch every NFL Sunday game, right? We all watch, we're all at home, we're all participants to making the NFL the great giant that it is today. But I always wondered, is it a scarcity game, right? They play 17 games, we play 162, we play 82 in basketball. My question to you is, if the Baltimore Orioles played 17 games, only on Sundays, and you play one Sunday, the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Mets, I wonder what that would do to our numbers.
I don't know. I've never thought about that, honestly. It's different. More people actually go to Major League Baseball games every year than NFL games, even though that's because we have so many games. There's a game every day, it seems. I don't know the answer to that, but I just wonder, what is it about sport that makes people so excited to watch it on television, streaming, why to go to games? Why are people so enamored with it? I think it just adds a different dimension to their life. They can feel they're proud of the team that they cheer for. It has some roots to them. You have to analyze, why is it that people are so excited about their teams? And even some people move away. A lot of people that came back to invest with me in the Orioles grew up in Baltimore. They haven't lived in Baltimore for 50 years, but they still have an attachment to it. And it's just hard to explain, but I'm not against it. I just hard to understand. Now, Boogie is, some of you have ever seen the movie Diner? Anybody ever seen that movie, Diner? Well, the person who was featured in it is Boogie Wineglass, and he was one of the characters in that movie. And Boogie was a great athlete in Baltimore, and he now lives in Aspen, but he still cares for the Orioles, and he roots for them all the time. He sends me emails every day about how the team is doing.
Also known as Mickey Mantle.
Right.
So, Alex, one of the strange things about sports ownership is you're competing kind of to the death with the other teams on the court or on the baseball field, but you're all sort of aligned when you're not on the field. How do you think about your role as an owner in terms of making the sport better and making the league better as opposed to just the Timberwolves?
Well, first of all, I don't know if I have anything to add. I'm a rookie all over again, and I'm really enjoying it. I mean, over the last 3 years, one of the great highlights of my career has been in the room with people like, Gregg and David, people that I've admired and studied for decades. And I'm just like looking around and I'm seeing Steve Ballmer and Mark Cuban and Jeannie Buss and David. I'm like, how the hell did I get in this room, right? And I'm the only color of brown skin in here, or one of them. So it's been a thrill, but maybe in 5 or 7 years when I cut my teeth a little bit more and show my value, maybe I can show them a little bit of how players think, what's important to them, from food to hotels to data science on sleeping habits. How to negotiate with players, what's important to them, deferral packages. These are things that's been part of the union for almost 25 years with Major League Baseball. Maybe I can make some contributions there.
And then, David, how about from a business standpoint? You talked about some of the challenges of baseball. Obviously, NFL's highly watched. The NBA is about to get a $76 billion media rights deal. The MLB does not have that. They've got kind of a mess with the RSNs. How do you plan to get involved at the league level to try to help the overall sport of baseball?
Well, the word rookie is what I am, so I don't know that these people that have owned these teams for 10, 20, and 30 years want a guy that's just bought a team a couple months ago tell him how to run the business. So I'm probably going to listen a lot. But I think the problem is that there hasn't been a nationwide baseball contract in the way you have for football and basketball. And as a result, the big teams that have the bigger populations, they make much more money and they can afford to hire more expensive players. So I'm not crying or complaining. I understood this when I got into it, but it's a game of the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots tend to be the smaller cities. So there are smaller city teams that generally can, from time to time, win a World Series, but generally the teams that have the best players and the most expensive players, certainly the big market teams. I think one of the issues the Orioles, all the Major League Baseball will face is whether you can ever change the agreement. I think last time there was in effect, a lockout, I guess it was, years ago. And there was an effort by the Major League Baseball then to try to get a 50-50 type deal, as in the NBA and NFL. It didn't come to pass. Right now, the Major League Baseball players get roughly 47% of the revenue, not 50%, but there's no salary cap in effect, so you can get a $700 million deal, and that upsets the people that can't afford to pay $700 million. So it's a complicated situation.
Let me just give a little unpacking for our audience here, David, because that's a very good point, the haves and have-nots. So the haves are obviously the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Mets. The Yankees, ever heard of the Yes Network? The Yes Network was started by Goldman Sachs, Jerry Carnell, and Gregg's partners. At the height, it was throwing off around $475 million of EBITDA. Okay, they would then turn around and pay the Yankees $200 million. Now, compared to the Marlins, who are collecting $14 million, it's impossible for the haves and have-nots to compete. And they're all part of the same league. One is not the big leagues, one is not regulated. This is the same league. There lies the problem. SNY is an example. They cover the Mets. They do about a little bit north of $150 million of EBITDA. You have the Dodgers over there. They get a check for $250 million guaranteed for the next 15 years. So there's a moat that is impossible to break in. And the only fix is you almost have to restack and restructure this whole league to make it work.
They'll do that at some point. But the Major League Baseball recognize that they're getting a different labor agreement. It's not easy to do. So they've made some changes to make the game more exciting. So they now have a pitch clock. In effect, can't wait for a minute before you pitch. You have a certain amount of time you have to pitch. They also have made it easier to kind of end extra inning games by putting a player on second base. They've made the bases bigger, so it's easier to steal. But for a long time, the games were going 3.5 hours, which was boring people. And secondly, everything was either a strikeout or a home run. And people are getting tired of just home runs and strikeouts. It's changed a bit, but it's a different game than when I was observing it 20, 30, 40 years ago. And when you came in, broke in, I assume it was a different type of game than it is today.
Much different.
So, Alex, one of the things that we touched on is the relationship with your community. And David talked about civic duty and buying the Orioles. You touched on George Floyd, but what was that like? What was the role of the Timberwolves in helping the community heal, given how proximate George Floyd actually was, given it was Minneapolis?
Yeah, I mean, that was a dark time in this country, around the world. I don't know about you guys, but just sitting at home with my family, my 2 daughters, it was scary. And you see people dying, you didn't know what was the fix. So anyways, I was scared out of my mind in Miami. And this is around the time that we were looking to buy the Timberwolves. And then, of course, George Floyd came, which was another, tragedy and so sad, right a few blocks away from Target Center where we play our home games. And like I said, I went to that first game and I said, holy smokes. So over the first year, like 10% was coming back. It was basically like, you felt like you were in a desert. There was nothing around in downtown. And I'm so proud to say that we're now back about 75% in the Western Conference Finals. Basically, when we came in, we had one sellout for 5 years in a row. Our first year we did 16, 27, and then we sold out every game, all 41 home games, and of course every postseason game. And our TV ratings have gone up 250%. So one of the things that I think David is trying to get at is, why do people cheer? I do feel that in this country, maybe even around the world, that the only two things that bring people together in the most divided this world's ever been, as we speak past each other, is music and sports bring people together. 20,000 people and more at Camden Yards, by the way, my favorite park in baseball, is you see people hugging and kissing and crying. They don't even know each other. They don't care if they're blue or red. They don't care if they're old or young. They don't care if they're Jewish or Catholic or Hispanic like me. It's all one team, orange and black, and for us is, our blue and white. So we brought in the George Floyd family. We celebrated with them in our locker room. We gave them team ball, and then we got very involved. And not just because the team wanted it, the players wanted to do it. And that's when I think like a player first. And I was so proud of the work we've been able to do with that family.
Well, for the last 14 years, I've chaired the Kennedy Center, which is the Performing Arts Center in Washington. And I like it because everybody leaves the Kennedy Center happy. When nobody goes to a play and say, I'm so upset that I saw this play, or I'm so upset that I saw this concert. They're happy. And happiness is one of the great things about life. Remember, Thomas Jefferson wrote, all about life is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are very few things that make people as happy these days because we have so many other challenges we have to deal with every day. The news is not great. So where can you find something that makes you happy? Well, performing arts can make you happy, and sports can make you happy if your team wins. And there's no doubt that sports make people very happy. And as Alex said, people that don't even know each other are hugging each other, cheering each other, high-fiving each other when their team wins. Why is that? Well, it's because they feel a sense of pride in their team. They feel that it means a little bit that they're a little bit better person because they now are part of a team, part of rooting for a team that won, and it makes them feel better as a human being, happier.
So we talked about love of sports, we talked about civic duty, but ultimately, as you just said, sports is about winning and losing and winning championships. You're both very fortunate to have teams that are performing great on the court and on the field, but how important is that part? How important is the winning part to each of you?
Well, winning is obviously better than losing as a general rule of thumb.
You guys should write that down.
As a general rule of thumb, I'd say. But, there are 30 teams in baseball, so only one's going to win the World Series every year. And I don't think there's ever been a case, though somebody I'm happy to listen otherwise, where somebody bought a team and that year they won a World Series. So I'm lowering expectations. But it's obviously a great thrill if you can do it. The two guys that bought the Boston Red Sox, they won 4 World Series after they hadn't won a World Series, I think, in 86 years. So it's a great thrill, and the people take great pride in it. And that's what I hope to do for Baltimore, is give them a sense of pride. Baltimore has some real challenges. There are challenges that many urban areas have, and overnight, the Orioles, if they win the World Series, they're not going to solve all the Baltimore's problems. But they can make people want to come to Baltimore, make people want to relocate headquarters there, do things that I think would help the city, which would be true of anybody that had a small town team and they all of a sudden got a lot of attention because the World Series winner was there.
So Alex, do you take losses harder as a player or an owner, or is it just different?
Oh, good question. I just think as an owner, because you're helpless. I'm like watching my kids, right? Is when I go watch my daughters in their play. My daughter's a freshman in Michigan, and she's in the musical theater program. And you should see me at one of these plays. I've never been more nervous. And I'm the loud dad cheering, and Natasha says, "Dad, you got to chill out with that. I'm going to get bullied out of school here." But I said, I like sports. I just want to cheer. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. You cheer at the end. But I agree with David in where winning is greater than losing. But what I've learned playing for some of the great owners, George Steinbrenner being one of them, is that there's more ways to winning than just win in the win column. There's winning in building a great team, building a great culture, building an unselfishness, continuity around business, sports, your civic duty in the community, the give back to our players and the ripple effect that those 15 players have in their communities. I mean, there's going to come a time that players are going to make $100 million a year in the NBA, and that's coming soon because of the $76 billion contract, right? And we split it 50-50. So that's a big responsibility for someone in their 70s or 60s. Imagine a kid 23, 24 years old making $100 million and what that comes with.
Yeah, and the players themselves, they feel important to help out the community. So every Major League Baseball team and every professional team has their players going to children's hospitals, visiting children who are sick or doing other things that are civic and trying to give back to the local community. And I think that's a good thing. We all remember pictures of Babe Ruth visiting Children's Hospital and how excited they were, or Lou Gehrig doing it. What's happening now all the time, players don't get as much attention for it, but they're doing it all the time, and I assume when you were a player, you were doing the same.
So, Alex, you talked about your role as mentor to players now, but you've been really proactive throughout your career in seeking mentors to you, I think from Jerry Reinsdorf to Magic Johnson to Warren Buffett. So how did you go about doing that, and what is it about you that makes you always want to be learning?
I've been trying to recruit David for 4 years, but all I got is I got an interview. He interviewed me, but he doesn't want to mentor me. But no, I'm just kidding. I haven't tried with David. I will at some point. But I've had some incredible mentors, and from Jerry Jones to Jerry Reinsdorf, Robert Kraft, Magic Johnson, I'll lean in because Magic Johnson is a spectacular human being. And he was my favorite basketball player of all time. But what made me want to be like him was the fact that he was a Hall of Fame basketball player, but then he created a Hall of Fame business career. And then what he's done to his communities, what I want to do with my community, black and brown communities. But when I saw a man of color wearing a suit, being polite, being humble, building great businesses, bringing other people of brown skin, women, all kinds to the boardroom, that gave me a tremendous amount of inspiration. So Magic's a great friend. I remember my meeting with him 20 years ago or so. We were just sitting there in Mastro's by Rodeo Drive. It was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting. It was a 3.5-hour meeting. Years later, I said, Magic, why'd you give me 3.5 hours? Well, you canceled a cookie, you canceled with your kids. He goes, you're the only player that's come in and had like 9 or 10 pages of notes. And I was so energized that I just kept going. And I hope that one day I can just be a fraction of that to the next generation of great young players.
So they're relatively few. Yeah, I had to applaud. There are relatively few owners of major league teams who are brown or black. It just is a sad fact that the amount of money that it now takes to do it is really beyond the reach of many people who are black or brown. And there are very few women who are really owners of teams either. So over the next 10 years or so, I think that's a goal of all the leagues, is to kind of bring much more diversity to the ownership so it reflects America. It's not easy to do, but it can be done. Michael Jordan was helped by the league to become the owner of the NBA team that he owned for a long time. And now there are some African-American owners not the principal owner, but African-American owners in the NFL. And in the baseball, there's some, but not as many as I think there should be.
So David, speaking of constantly learning, you're amongst the smartest people I know in the world. You're not yet the smartest person in baseball. So how do you go about learning? Who are you seeking to get guidance from as you go into this new venture?
Well, I read a lot, so I read all the baseball stuff I can read up. I'm trying to read the last 50 years, what happens in the 50 years I haven't been paying attention to baseball. So I read a lot. I do interview some people from time to time, and I have to prepare. I interviewed Alex Rodriguez, and I had to prepare and read a lot about that. But also, there's a lot of people in baseball who want to be mentors and educate me, and so I always say yes and listen to them. And a lot of people just want new owners to succeed, and so it helps baseball. It doesn't help baseball if a new owner is done a bad job. So I listen to a lot of people, and that's the best way to do it, is learn from people who have more experience.
Great. So I'm going to open it up to audience questions in a minute, but Alex, I did want to ask you one more specific question. So you made a minority investment in the Timberwolves in 2021 at a valuation of $1.5 billion. As a side editorial note, at the time the team was 23 and 49. The agreement was to buy it in 3 stages at the same valuation, 20%, 20%, then the last 40% in control this spring. The deal has not yet happened. I will note that the 2024 team was 56 and 26 and Western Conference finalists. So could you just talk about the status of your pursuit to become a control owner of the Timberwolves?
Sure. I mean, I'm limited in what I can say. What I will say, just one correction on that, Greg. We made this deal, I believe, in the spring of 2021, and we did it in Naples, where Mark and I met with Glenn Taylor and Becky Taylor, and they were lovely. Got a lasagna salad, Caesar salad, lasagna. It was great. And it was really done in the back of an envelope. And it was basically, Glenn said, okay, I'll name the price, you name the terms. And we agreed on 1.5 and paid over 4 stages, 20%, 20, 40, which is now, and 20. But we're going to take the whole 60% down now, hopefully after arbitration. When there's a dispute, NBA has basically a path, and the path is mediation. We did that. That went nowhere. And then sometime this fall, we'll have a 3-person arbiters. We have one, they have one. It's basically one person making the decision, and it is binding. So whatever he decides, that's what we're going to go with. And that's where we're at. So we feel confident, but you never know. Somebody can go the other way, and then we'll be out of luck.
Good luck. Well, I've got questions to go all night with these guys, but I want to open it up to some audience questions right here in the front. Right there. Hand up. Yep. Sid.
This man.
Thank you. My name is Sid Wilson. I'm the president and CEO of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. Dominicano de pura cepa, I gotta put that out there, so thank you, Alex. My question for you, Alex, is that you touched on this a little earlier in your conversation about you being one of the few Latinos, definitely the only Dominican, in these meetings with all these other owners. Can you talk about your evolution of going there from feeling like I belong to now knowing that you do belong in these meetings where you may be the only person in the room of color?
Yeah, that's a great question. And look, I played almost 25 years in Major League Baseball. And I think part of my gifts and my faults was I never felt like I belonged. I always felt like I had something to prove. And partly probably because Dad left when I was 10, right? And I had no idea why. So you always have that kind of hole in your stomach. And that's also what helps me kind of keep driving. I know Gregg is a good buddy of mine. I've never once said a baseball story. I'm not the guy that says, hey, remember me, I hit a home run. Like, people embarrass me when they say that. So I always talk about, I read a stat the other day that more than 50% of college graduates never read another book again. That's remarkable. So I like to say, I didn't have a college degree. I've been teaching at Stanford Business School now for 6 years, but I'm a lifetime learner. I'm very, very inquisitive. I have a great appetite for information, and every day I'm doing 5, 6, 7 hours of studying. And I learned that from my mentor, Warren Buffett, right? Because he sits and reads for 8 hours. Now he does 4 or 5 because he's gotten a little bit older. But I'm always going to feel like I have to prove, and until I bring other people in the room with me, Magic taught me this. It's not your job just to get in the room and close the doors, to get in the room and leave that door open and bring others with you. And when I do that, I feel like I've arrived, probably.
Why don't you ask what it feels like to be the only Jewish owner in baseball? You didn't ask that, okay.
Alex, now that you're involved with another sport, have you been surprised, or are there differences between basketball players and baseball players except for the height?
Oh, great question. Well, that height, that was an easy one. It's interesting. David touched on something which is interesting. College players go to the NBA. Kids from high school usually go to the Major League Baseball, and they usually go to minor leagues, right? I didn't know this, but I got to the big leagues at 18, but I didn't realize there was only 3 players in the history of the game to play in the major leagues at 18. Lou Piniella, my former manager, like a father figure to me, myself, and I have no idea who the third is, but I'll do some research.
Joe Nuxhall.
Is that who it is?
Well, he pitched at 16, 17.
There you go. So I would say when NBA players get to the league, they're already stars. They've been stars in the college campuses and all of this. When baseball players, and I think David has the best farm system in the game, and he has one of my favorite players playing shortstop in Henderson, who's a rock star, and the catcher, forget it, I can go on and on about that. So the sooner he signs those better, he's going to just remember this day and say, the sooner I sign him, the better, because those contracts all age very well. But those guys, we have to make ourselves stars, right? Because nobody really knows us. And all you got to look at is the #1 follower on social media in basketball is a guy like, LeBron James, who has about $150. And baseball, I think Ohtani and I are still 1 and 2. And I haven't played in 9 years, right? 8 years. So I think that's a big difference.
Yes, in the black dress there. Or black top.
Thanks so much for being here. My question is about women's sports. Lots of exciting things happening. If you looked at it just from the lens of a good investment, is there a component of women's sports that would be, a team, a particular sport that you think would be the most interesting?
Yeah, listen, I'll jump in because we've looked at it.
Investment?
Yeah, women's sports.
Women's sports. Women's sports have turned out to be a good investment compared to what people thought. Women's soccer prices have gone way up recently in the United States. And there's a person who is an owner of the LA Dodgers who started a women's hockey team, and he now owns all the teams. I suspect at some point he'll sell them off. But I think the quantitative dollars involved is much smaller because the fan viewership is smaller and the TV contracts aren't as great yet. But there's no doubt that NBA, women's basketball has, because of Caitlin, has come on, and as a result of what she's done, I think viewership is much up. But women's sports don't yet attract the same viewership and therefore probably the same money. But as in terms of investment, in terms of quantitative of your money you put in, it's been a great investment for those who bought women's soccer teams, those who bought women's basketball teams 5 and 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'd say, if you look at it going forward, so I think 97% of in the U.S., 97% of the dollars in sports are going to men's sports, between TV contract, attendance, kind of everything else, 97-3, which is not indicative of high school sports or college sports or anything else. So clearly the growth is going to happen in women's sports on a relative basis. They have to take more of the pie. I don't know if it's 5% or 10%, but it's going to have to be more of the pie. And so you've got higher growth, and their multiples are lower. So the valuations the aggregate dollar valuations are much lower, but even the multiples that are being paid that are much lower. And so if you think about the trends in the WNBA with Caitlin Clark and NWSL with what's going to come when the World Cup comes back, I think you'll actually see an increase in value in women's sports.
Yeah, and Greg, let me put some numbers to that. I'm sorry, David.
Go ahead.
Just to break that down into numbers, part of our holding companies, we own the Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx. We've been fortunate with the Lynx, who we won 4 championships, and we're off to a very hot start. I'm going to go watch them on, when is it, Saturday? Next week. So when you look at the numbers, I would say for the last 20 years, very pedestrian, if not below average as an investment. I think the worst days are behind us, and the great days, the glory days are coming. As an example, in the Lynx, if we're making $12 million a year today, 2 of that comes from TV. In the next TV deal, that 2 is going to go to probably 12. So now we go to $25 million of top-line revenue, and about breaking even. But if you put a 10-time multiple on that, you go to $250 million valuation. In our books today, we have them at 0. Right? So my point is moving fast, and it shouldn't be at 0. It should probably be somewhere around 50, right? Because there's a new expansion or 60. But the fact is, whether it's 250 or 200, you get into real business, and you can make a return, as David likes to say, the MOIC is going to probably be greater if you come into an early stage WNBA basketball team, fast forward 7 years, to if you buy into the Timberwolves or the Orioles.
Yes, I think one of the other reasons that sports values have gone up is betting. Betting is more or less legal, and a lot of people like to bet on sports, rightly or wrongly, and so that's been a big factor. A second factor is the globalization of sports like basketball. Basketball now the NBA has an African league, and they're building a European league, and because basketball is a global sport, increasingly players are known all over the world, and so therefore you can get much higher contracts if you're a player because you're known all over the world, and you can do exhibitions around the world. It's a much different game. Baseball has tended to be mostly in the United States and Japan and some Central America, but hasn't really grown that much in Europe yet. Hopefully it will. But I think the biggest area of increase probably will be college sports, because what's going to happen is people will go and say, I'm going to buy the Duke basketball team. I'm going to buy the USC football team, because we're in a mode now where the colleges have to pay the players, and eventually the colleges are going to figure out they don't want to be in that business, and they're going to sell it to private equity for some price that will be reasonable, and the kids will still go to school. But basically, I think you'll see private equity or other investors taking over from the colleges that operate these things. And another big increase in value will be coming from sovereign wealth funds. Right now, most sovereign wealth funds cannot invest in U.S. sports, with some exceptions. But gradually, over the next 5 or 10 years, I think you'll see sovereign wealth funds and public pension funds as well buying sports teams and increasing the value.
And David, to your point, if you look at the Las Vegas team in Seattle, that's going to probably fetch somewhere around $5 to $5.5 billion. So to be a control partner, I mean, you got to be David rich. You got to write a check for over $1 billion just to own 15% of a team, or 20 or 25, right? So these numbers are getting bigger and bigger. So that's why sovereign funds is more relevant today more than ever.
Well, look at it this way: you paid $1.5 billion for a team. The new teams that are going to be granted, I think one in Las Vegas and maybe another one, they're going to go for $4 billion with no players.
More than that.
All right, more than that, but no players.
Right.
And so, let's suppose you got $5 billion or $5.5 billion in it. You paid $1.5 billion, so pretty good deal.
Good question here, in the white.
Alex, quick question for you. Obviously, you're a smart guy. You have the right team around you to teach you what you needed to know. What's the biggest hurdle for the next generation of athletes to be in the position that you're in?
I think humility. It's hard to stay humble when you're making so much money, right? And it's the perfect storm, because you're making so much money and you've got more attention than ever before. And you get to play less and you get to travel better, right? As someone said, pitchers have never pitched less and made more. Right? And that's something that I talk about this with Pat Riley all the time. we have a team that likes to play every single game. My favorite player was Cal Ripken. I played 3 years in a row without playing a game. That was because Cal did it, and I wanted to be like Cal, and I wanted to be like Magic. So role models are important, humility is important, and just staying focused and grounded, just like our kids. I mean, these are an extension of our kids. It's very hard to raise kids. It's even more difficult if you have a tremendous amount of wealth to keep your kids' feet on the ground. Same is true with our players.
It changed. When I was growing up in Baltimore, the best athletes were Johnny Unitas, a football player, or Brooks Robinson, the baseball player. They had to have jobs in the off-season, selling insurance or selling cars, because the players didn't make that much. Now, you don't obviously have that problem. And remember, when Babe Ruth got the highest contract ever, I think he got a $100,000 contract, and people said to him, how can you justify that contract? That's more than the President of the United States made. And he said, well, I had a better year than the President did.
I think we got time for one more audience question, and then right down here in the front. Sorry.
Okay. I don't think I need a mic. So, Alex.
There you go. Here's a mic.
I have a question for each of you. So, Alex, you talked about the Yankees and a tradition like no other, like the Masters. So, what do you think about the pundits who say you don't really own a sports team, you just look after it for the next generation?
I think it was 100% accurate. I mean, really what we're stewards, right? And we're managers of this great franchise. The fan base owns the franchise. And by the way, when the fan base wants you out, you're out. and you got to just, roll with the punches. But it's really a responsibility, it's a civic duty to run a great franchise, to have a right culture, to be a connector in those cities. But I agree. I mean, I say we're managers of the franchise. How do you say it, David?
I agree. You have a civic responsibility, a civic duty. If you're an owner of a team, like a player, you shouldn't be doing things that are inappropriate. You should be respectful of the city and the players, and be a bit of a role model. And so, in my own case, I'm not a role model necessarily, but I try to be close to the fans and show them that I care what they think, and I'm not trying to say, look, I'm a rich guy and I own the team and you're just fans. I'm trying to say I'm one of you, and I go out and sit with them in the bleachers or do other things like that to kind of say, look, I'm one with you. I'm a Baltimore boy as well, and try to make the fans feel that we're all in this together, and that's what I think makes a good owner.
Okay, one last question. I'm going to change topics real quick because we only have David for this is your last day here. So, Alex, I think you were a little young when the Carter administration, was in power, and I think had the highest inflation maybe in history, and I think seconded only by Biden. So, David, who's going to be our next president?
The next president of the United States will be somebody who has served as president of the United States. That's all I can tell you.
This could be a good candidate right here.
It should be. Look,
no, thanks, Alex.
On that one
No, thanks,
question,
you're good.
I have a book coming out, I mentioned earlier, about the presidency, and it's coming out in September. And for that, I just interviewed Joe Biden for an hour alone in the Oval Office. No staff there, just me and him. And then I interviewed Donald Trump for an hour alone as well. And, I think it's going to be really close. It's too early to say, but I would say if you try to predict who the president's going to be 4 or 5 months in advance, you're almost always going to be wrong. You wouldn't have predicted 4 months in advance, Barack Obama necessarily. You wouldn't have predicted Donald Trump. You wouldn't have predicted Joe Biden necessarily. So it's just hard to know. And I think the most important message I want to get out to people is go out and vote. We have roughly 62% of people voting in presidential elections. That's it, 62%. We have, tens of millions of Americans have died protecting the right to vote, yet some people don't even vote. So, I don't think people should complain that much about the outcome if they haven't voted. And it's a sad situation now that only 6 states probably make a real difference. But if you live in one of these 6 states, be sure you get out and vote. And even if you don't live in these 6 states, go out and vote because that's a civic responsibility and a duty. And all of us as Americans should want to really exercise the franchise that so many people have fought so long to protect for us. So that's the message of my book.
All right, I got one last question for each of you, then I'm going to end with a quick rapid fire. So, David, one of the other unique elements of sports ownerships is public-private partnerships. Partnering with city and state governments, which can be controversial,
right.
Especially if they feel like they're bailing out billionaires. But how important is your relationship with the city and the state, and how critical is that partnership to help revitalize Camden Yards and keep the Orioles in Baltimore?
Well, for those who don't know, Camden Yards revolutionized baseball stadiums. In the 1960s and 70s, baseball stadiums were androgynous. They could be used for football, they could be used for baseball, they could be used for soccer. And it was finally decided by the Orioles in 1992 and 3 that they should make a stadium that looked like an old stadium, like Wrigley Field, which was opened in 1912, I mean, Fenway Park in 1912, Wrigley Field, not much longer after that. And so we built a baseball stadium that looks like a baseball stadium. All the baseball stadiums built since then look like old-fashioned baseball stadiums. The Orioles stadium is now, it's owned by the state of Maryland, and it's now 30 years old. So the state of Maryland's going to put up money to rehab it. I have the responsibility with my other owners of the team to kind of make sure we do a good job of making certain that the stadium is as good as it could be when we finish the renovation. But the problem is that even wealthy owners don't often have the resources to build a stadium. The Camden Yards cost $110 million to build. Today it would cost about $1.5 billion. It's very hard to find people that can put up that kind of money to build a stadium. And so you do need a civic partnership, but it has to be a fair one where the city gets fair rent and fair payback for what it's done. And I think this is a controversial thing in some cities, but I think it's very difficult to have professional sports without some kind of local partnership involved.
Yep. All right, Alex, last one for you. You're once an athlete, always an athlete. You look still reasonably fit for almost 50. What do you do to stay fit and stay in shape? And are you in good enough shape that if David needs a DH down the stretch, he can sign you up?
This second one is easy, no. And looks can be deceiving, but I feel pretty good. After COVID, I gained a bunch of weight, and again, I was like so stressed, and I don't know how you guys felt, but I was, again, very nervous. I lost my way a little bit. And after that, I said, you know what? From now on, I have to just change the way I do things. And I've made a paradigm shift. And from 8 o'clock in the morning when I wake up, I try to get 8 hours. From 8 to 12, that's my time. So I do my workout, my yoga, meditating, go in the pool, whatever I have to do. And then every day.
You don't check your phone, right?
And I don't check my phone unless you're checking me. And then from noon to 6, I'm in the office every day, suit and tie, and I go to work, and that's my time. And then I go home and have dinner with my girls. But that 4 hours in the day just to invest in myself, in my health, and my wellness, and my mental capacity, it's been a really great investment.
And I spend 4 hours a day thinking about exercising. But I get nervous because I said earlier, I get my exercise being a pallbearer at the funerals of my friends who exercise too much.
But David, you have a nice gym at home. What do you do with that gym?
I know.
All right, we're going to wrap. You guys have been amazing. I got 3 final questions, rapid fire style for each of you. All right? Who's the sports owner you most admire and want to emulate? David.
Well, I think Bob Kraft has done an incredible job. He won 6 NFL championships and was a person who was close to his players. He was very civically responsible, and now he's done a great thing. He started something to combat anti-Semitism. And if any of you are familiar with it, he started this with his own money. Other people have contributed now. But it's really a nationwide effort to combat the rise of anti-Semitism, which is extraordinary in the country now. So he'd be the owner that I most admire.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. Mine is Jerry Reinsdorf. I mean, simply said, he's a gold standard, 6 championships with the Bulls, 1 with the Chicago White Sox. He bought the team, the White Sox, for $16 million with a couple buddies, the White Sox, and then 3 years later, he bought the Bulls for $19 million. And he came out of real estate. He was a tax lawyer, came from the very bottom, Brooklyn kid, loves, Jackie Robinson, Pee Wee Reese, and just his story is pretty awesome and what he's done in the community and how he stays low-key.
All right, the second question. Best moment as an owner so far?
I would have to say Game 7 against Denver. We were down 3-2, playing to go to the Western Conference Finals, playing against a 3-time MVP in Jokic. We're down 20 in Game 7. I'm feeling very depressed at the time. Went for a long walk at halftime with Tim Conley, who's our new president, who's also from Baltimore. All he wants to talk about is the Orioles. And we came back and won and went to the Western Conference Finals. That was probably one of the greatest moments of my life.
How about you, David? I know it's early, but what's the best moment?
The first day, I'm on the field where I had watched many games. And when I was a boy, I always go to baseball games and sit in the bleachers and then try to sneak in the second or third inning to a better seat, then in the 5th or 6th, sneak another. And by the 9th inning, I'm in the box seats, and always somebody would come along and kick me out. And I was on the field, I'm wondering whether the guy who used to kick me out would come along now and say, get off the field. But, when you're an owner, of a team that you've watched for many years, it's obviously a great thrill, and we won the opening day, so that was good too.
Great. All right, last one for each of you. What do you want your legacy to be as a sports owner? David.
The first person to win a World Series in his first year and never lost another World Series championship after that.
Setting the bar high, I like it. All right, Alex, what do you want your legacy to be as an owner?
I would just say the same thing. No, but I love, 20, 30 years from now to look back and have someone talk about the Timberwolves being a champion. And more importantly, for some young people, that I could do for them what Magic did for me, and that ownership is more symbolic of what America looks like and not just so one-sided.
Well, you guys are both incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Thank you.